managing supply chains in the face of climate disaster. Speaking with Kareem Mohamednur, he is a partner with PwC. Hello, Kareem.
Hello, good afternoon.
Yeah, thank you very much for being with me. I really appreciate it. So, Kareem, where do you believe that the biggest challenges currently lie as companies are striving to comply with ESG requirements, environmental, social, and governance requirements affecting their supply chains?
It's a great question, Bob. And we're having this exact conversation with so many supply chain sustainability leaders these days. And when you look at just the confluence of headwinds, be it inflation related, geopolitical concerns, regulatory, cost management, labor markets, there's a ton that is really getting in the way of organizations achieving some of the goals that they've set out. If I
Mhm.
had to name the top challenges, one I'd say is managing that balance between what I might call the holy trinity of cost management, risk and resilience, and sustainability. Oftentimes, those three don't necessarily go in the same direction, and so there's a constant need to balance between where you're focusing or prioritizing at any given time. The second I'd call out is visibility and transparency into the full end-to-end value chain. So, whether it's scope three emissions on one end of the spectrum as it relates to the E, or mitigating and eliminating human rights issues out of your supply chain from an S perspective, one of the key enablers to being able to do those things is having visibility, not just into your direct suppliers, but all the way down to their suppliers and their suppliers. We call it tier N. And
Mhm.
getting that visibility and transparency is incredibly challenging. And then the third that I would list is once you have that transparency, how do you mobilize, engage, and incentivize the supply base? So, oftentimes we're talking about thousands or even tens of thousands of suppliers. Getting your arms around who they are and how their own maturation journey they are is one challenge. And then doing something about it once you identify those gaps is a much bigger one.
So that's all, huh? No problem. That is a lot to for supply chains to be concerned with these days. Do you feel that there's a general awareness of this among companies that they just need to do this? I mean, there's certainly a fire burning in terms of regulatory requirements and also customer demand. Do you believe that companies are actually making progress on these fronts?
I think those are two questions. One, is the awareness there? Yes, they certainly are aware that balancing these priorities is incredibly challenging. I think many organizations are struggling with how do you determine whether to prioritize short-term versus long-term needs, because in times like this, especially through severe inflation, as well as the multitude of geopolitical concerns out there, the answer to what do we do if we're focused on short term versus what do we do if we're focused on long term is often not the same.
Mhm.
So yes, the awareness is there. Now your question around are they making progress against those goals? It's a challenge. It's a real challenge. I think in some cases are you have a handful of some of the mature companies that have been on this journey for a long time that absolutely are making the progress that they intend to. But then you have the multitude of others, call them that middle tier of organizations that have maybe have set net zero commitments, have set scope three reduction targets, and the vast majority of them. There's a study that was released a few months ago. Something like 93% of organizations are on target to miss their scope three reduction
Wow.
commitments unless they double the pace of their emissions reductions by 2030. So a lot of work to
Good
do in a
luck.
short amount of time.
Yeah, you referenced scope three. Those, of course, are the emissions that are generated by supply chain partners over which these companies have no direct control.
That's right.
And by definition, that is a multi-tier supply chain. So just that one specific thing, are they gaining the visibility throughout those tiers? That's got to be step one, as you point out. Are there still challenges getting down those multiple tiers to even see what the emissions are, let alone measure them, let alone control them?
That is the challenge. You've named it quite well.
Mhm.
I'll give you an example. I've been working closely with a global food and beverage company over the last couple of years, whose supply chain begins all the way at the farm. And as
Sure.
you can imagine, for a Fortune 50 global food and beverage company, they're working with thousands and thousands of farms and smallholders across every region and many crop types, right? Row crops, palm, sunflower, et cetera. And when they're two, three, four tiers removed from your direct supplier, that visibility is incredibly challenging. So we've been using a variety of solutions from managing direct suppliers for data collection, to piercing big data solutions, to geospatial analyses as a means to collate as precise a picture as feasible. The reality is there's no perfect solution in today's world for 100% accurate end-to-end supply chain transparency. So you have to combine a lot of different pieces to get as close as you can get.
Yeah. And of course, this is not just an internal effort that's required. Regulators in Europe and in the United States are requiring that these things be reported. So this visibility, you're saying it's not perfect, and yet the regulators are coming on with these requirements even before it's perfect. So I imagine that a lot of companies are falling short. What is the role, Kareem, of procurement in this effort? I imagine the spotlight really shines on them in terms of achieving these goals.
There's a huge role of procurement, and a lot of it is around how do you mobilize your suppliers and your supply chain to support these environmental, social, and governance ambitions. I'll give you a quick example. I'm leading a team right now. We're working with a global software technology company to build and execute against a detailed glide path, working backwards from a 2025 interim scope 3 target. As you can imagine, 2025 is right around the corner, and the trend line for them is trailing. So the objective for this project is, how do we maintain the right level of engagement with the highest impact suppliers that need the most support in making progress towards their and the company's environmental goals? So we're leveraging our supplier sustainability management framework to help this company be ultra precise around where they are using resources to create the most optimal impact. And as you can imagine, that is absolutely a procurement responsibility, because procurement tends to own a lot of the supplier relationships. They tend to own the negotiation and engagement strategy. They tend to hold the keys to how you execute, say, an RFP process, and how you contract with these suppliers, and then how you manage them on the back end. So short answer to your question is procurement plays a huge role in it.
And I imagine going forward, they need to build in these reporting and visibility requirements into contracts with suppliers. In other words, they
Yes.
won't do business with a supplier unless it can provide the necessary visibility, right? It has to happen.
You're spot on. And that's a big challenge, not just for the procurement organizations, but for the suppliers too, because the suppliers are now getting inundated with different versions of these same requests from all of their customers. And so they're having to prioritize which customers do we care the most about, or, because they have limited resources. And so one of the things that a lot of organizations are working on is, how do we get this to be more systematic? How do we move from really unstructured data to more structured data? You think about something like emissions reporting. It's a little bit more straightforward. We really need a number. We need to understand what your, say, scope 3 emissions are. But then there's a lot of qualitative information that helps to let you know if you're on the right track or not. So have you set a science-based target? What's the maturity of your current program? How do you engage your own supply chain today? Getting that information together for a single supplier for dozens of customers is a really uphill battle, is a very much an uphill battle. And so procurement teams are even struggling just to get responsiveness from their suppliers as a part of this. But to your point, building it into their normal supplier master data processes so that they can enrich everything with that type of understanding is top of radar for them.
If we can assume that the data is there, that there is a flood of data out there, I wonder what role technology can play in helping us to analyze that data. Artificial intelligence, reporting, blockchain, anything like that. What are the technology tools that you're seeing out there that are particularly exciting, that might help us to achieve these goals?
There's a few. So on one hand, you have a lot of the source to pay tools that have been out there for a long time that are focused on how do you ingest and ask the right questions to get the right data. And when you're able to do that, it marries very well with all of the downstream source to pay processes. The challenge is, one, oftentimes you're using a source to pay technology for indirect materials and maybe not direct materials. And so you're getting some limitations in terms of how comprehensive that data is. Two, the source to pay tools are still sort of catching up with being able to not just ingest the data, but then to organize it and put it in a usable manner. Outside of source to pay, you have some of the more innovative solutions out there that are building supplier portals that can sit on a database and take that data and do things like, and this is what we're working on with a number of companies, do things like visualize and dashboard exactly the progress that your suppliers are making. take that information, put them on a segmentation profile so that you can say, okay, here's our, in that top right box, here's our most important suppliers, the ones that have the highest impact on our business overall. And then layer in, what do you do about it? And so using something like an incentivization framework to marry against the segmentation they fall on and just give really actionable guidance around how to engage those suppliers. This supplier, you should invest resources. This supplier, you should invest training and mentorship. This supplier is on a great trajectory. Just check in and ensure that you're collecting the right data from them on a regular basis.
So despite all the obstacles you've laid out for us, I take it you believe that there is hope that companies can achieve all these objectives at once and make real progress and stay in business and just everything. I mean, is there hope?
I'm optimistic. I'm optimistic for a few reasons. One, the technology and the infrastructure is getting built very quickly. There's a lot of companies focused on building that infrastructure so that organizations have the tools at their disposal to be able to tell the story that they need to tell. Two, we're seeing a lot of pickup in companies starting to make commitments and make them publicly and get behind those commitments with the right infrastructure internally. So, having responsible sourcing teams, having responsible supply chain teams, building the governance structures internally so that the board is involved, the C-suite is involved, and there's change management routines put in place. And then thirdly, the third reason why I'm optimistic is we're continuing to see more and more pressure from key stakeholders, customers, investors, regulators, employees are all putting more and more emphasis on organizations meeting these targets and commitments and getting behind these ESG goals.
Kareem Mohamednur of PwC, thank you so much for spending time with me to explain what some of these challenges and some solutions are for companies meeting ESG goals in their supply chains. Thanks so much.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.